Good day, students. Welcome to part 2 of the Introduction to Still Life Drawing. For those of you all who would have tuned into part 1, you should remember that we would have looked at the importance of a sketchbook and also the tools and materials necessary for creating your drawing. As for part 2, I'm beginning on a larger sheet of paper, which is approximately 17 by 24 inches, and I'm using an HB pencil for the drawing. I'm using an HB pencil simply because it does not put down very harsh lines, and these lines are easier to cover when I go in with a darker pencil such as a 2B, 4B or 6B pencil. At present, these lines act as a guide which will indicate the placement of the objects on the composition. I'm working out the scale, also perspective, and seeing how things fit on the foreground, middle ground and background. So I'm creating that space. The composition is set up to my left, so I'm taking regular glances in that direction. These glances act as snapshots, so as I look, I take up bits of information and I try to transfer that information onto that sheet of paper. I also avoid erasing on this stage. If I do make a mistake, I correct the mistake right then and there so that I actually see where the mistake is and see where the correction is made. After this, then I would erase. I always suggest that you try to sit in a position of comfort. If you're right-handed, it's better to work from the left of your sheet of paper to the right, and vice versa if you're left-handed. Try to get relaxed. If you work better in music, play some music. If you work better in silence, try to find a nice quiet zone and block out as much of the noise as possible. Also take note that I am trying to avoid making contact with the surface of the paper with my bare hands. This is to avoid the transfer of these oils on my skin onto the sheet of paper. Once completed with this rough sketch, it will act as a guide where I can go in with a 2B pencil and put down some more final lines onto this drawing. So, the initial sketch phase or blueprint of the drawing, which was done with an HB pencil, has been completed. I can now go in with a 2B pencil and clean up those sketch lines by putting some harsher, more defined lines. I'm focusing on the T-box first, which is located to the left of the composition, and simply because it's a geometric form, I'll be using a ruler to get some nice, straight, clean lines. While doing so, I need to consider the whole concept of perspective, because as an object goes farther into the distance, it would appear to get smaller. So to show this, I would begin to narrow the distance between parallel lines so that I create that illusion of perspective. I also consider the fact that the items in the composition are of different shapes, and I try to copy these shapes as accurately as possible. What one must consider is not simply the positive space of whatever form you're drawing. You must also consider the negative space or the spaces between the forms. Once you get those shapes more accurate, so too do you get your drawing. Also keep in mind that because I'm trying to depict the whole concept of perspective, all the vertical lines of the drawing should be perfectly straight and vertical. They shouldn't be curved or bent or diagonal. Curved lines should remain curved for the other more organic objects, such as the spoon, the teacup, and also even the kettle. As I put down more solid lines, you'll notice that I would be erasing. This is to clean up those lines that were made with the HB pencil. All right, these lines are no longer necessary, so to avoid any confusion with them, I just erase them out. All right, I'm moving on to the kettle and trying to get those lines as accurately as possible as well. Remember, as mentioned, don't simply pay attention to the form, pay attention to the negative space around the form as well, so that once you try copying both the negative space and the form accurately, you'll get a more precise looking drawing. All right, don't forget, from time to time, get up, stand away from your drawing, look at it from a distance, so that you get a better or keener sense of how persons would view the drawing. Because when you're too close to it, you tend to make mistakes very easily, and you lose a bit of the depth and the perspective of the work. Right? Something to keep in mind, because you may notice while drawing, you are drawing from different pivot points. All right? So you can either draw from your wrist, your elbow, or in some cases, depending on the size, you'll be drawing from your shoulder as your pivot point. Right? But pay attention to the simple fact that there are some times when I'll be actually drawing using my wrist to make curves, and then other times I'll be using my elbow to make larger curves, as in the case of the kettle and also with respect to the teacup. So as mentioned before, this is a drawing from direct observation. It's not an imaginative piece. So it is very important to take frequent looks at the actual composition setup, so that whatever you're copying looks as accurate as what you have in front of you. Pay attention to your light source and your shadows. Right? Note that there are different types of shadows. You have cast shadows, you have core shadows, and these shadows would tend to change throughout the duration of the day if you're working with natural light alone. So it is always suggested that when you're working, either you work during the same time of day on all occasions, or you set up some type of artificial lighting which would keep that light at a constant and the shadows at a constant, so that you don't mix up your shadows or you have any kind of confusion going on. keep in mind that objects are usually of different materials, so the textures that you'll be going for should be different as the object varies, right? So for this piece, we particularly have a white cardboard box. There's a metal kettle, right, with a wooden handle. There's also a ceramic teacup and saucer. There's a piece of fabric, which is the tablecloth, which is folded. Also, the spoon there is stainless steel, and the tea bag sachet is paper, right? It's all resting on a surface which is a brown cardboard box, and although we are using the same medium throughout, you need to manipulate it in such a way where you try to convey the illusion that these are all objects of different textures, of different materials. Right? As I'm bringing this whole line drawing process to a close, I'm looking at detailing as much as possible, putting in any arresting characteristics, any features such as brand names, the decorations, any logos and stuff like that. That would go in at this very last stage so that you try your very best to get as accurate as possible, right? Feel free at this stage, once the object is done, you can move it around a little bit, right? But also try to put markers on the surface so that you know exactly where the object was placed, right? Sometimes if you have that available, you can take a photo of it so that if you need to move around anything, you can put it back exactly where you had it previously, right? The very, very last thing I would do at this line process, I would try to soften the lines to get them to one general tone, and you would see me using a kneaded eraser over the entire surface so that all those lines are pretty much of a similar quality, right? So that when I go in after with the shading, I'm not obstructed by any of these lines because none is too harsh, right? And I can now go in and detail and define and create that whole concept or illusion of a line by placing contrast with dark meeting light in certain areas so that lines are created using contrast as opposed to having hard lines on the surface. I have completed the line drawing, and upon completing it, I would now like to start the shading. The line part of it though would have taken approximately an hour to an hour and 20 minutes in real time, and this should be the average time that you should take when working at this size. For the shading aspect, I would start with the object which is closest to the viewer, which would be the T-box, and I would gradually begin working backward and also working from the left to the right of the composition. This is so I can regulate the tones which I'm using, so I have some sort of gradation with the foreground being darker, and as I work my way into the middle ground and the background, it gradually becomes lighter because the foreground should carry the most detail, whereas the middle ground and background would carry less detail as you go into the composition. When shading, keep your light source in mind and try to shade in the direction which the light is traveling so that you have more realistic looking shadows and it gives a greater illusion of light hitting the surface of the object. You have to remember that lines themselves are an illusion created by contrast between light and dark areas. Use the tooth or the grittiness of the paper, and in cases where you have smoother paper, try to create some type of frottage. Frottage meaning you can use some textured surface underneath the paper so that you transfer that surface to create that illusion of texture. typically persons shade either from dark to light or from light to dark. Personally, I prefer to work from light to dark because I have more control over the shadows, and it's easier to correct mistakes if I'm working from light to dark by lifting up tones using the kneaded eraser. Observe the various types of shadows in a composition. You would of course have your core shadows, which would be on the object, and then you'll have your cast shadow. With your cast shadow, it would come in three different shades, right? You have your umbra, which is closest to the object. That will be a darkest shadow or darkest area of your shadow. Then you have your penumbra, which is a gradual lighter form of the shadow. And lastly, you have something called your antumbra, which is a phased out, smoothed shadow, which is very, very light. Consider and observe the various types of shadows that you would notice on the surface of the object and also those being cast. As for the surface or the core shadows, you would have some halftones being generated. You'd also have some light hitting the surface. The strongest light would be your highlights. Then you may have some reflective light, which would happen in the case of plastics and reflective materials such as metal. Also, you'll notice some rim lighting occurring, and that tends to happen when you have some secondary light source occurring. From time to time as you're working, check on your values. Ensure that there's a clear range on the objects, also with the shadows. Ensure that you're able to clearly identify the various planes of the work, namely your foreground, middle ground, and background. Because of the fact that you have varied textures on the surfaces of the object, try to manipulate your shading in such a way where you actually capture that variety. Travel in the direction which the light travels over the surface, and in so doing, you would have to actually curve your shadows in some areas, or you would use straighter shadows as the light travels. Keep in mind that the placement of one object would affect the shadow of another object. So you'll have shadows being cast from one object, or you may have light being reflected from one object cast onto another surface. As in the case of the kettle, which is a metal surface, you would notice that there's actually a reflection of the tea box on the kettle, and this could be subtly added in by doing some reflection using an eraser to pull out those highlights. The very last aspect of this drawing exercise would be to pull out or erase highlights. This would tend to soften some shadows, or in the case of texture, you would be adding some value through texture. If you pay attention to the handle, I am using an electric eraser here so that I can actually put some harsh light on the surface of the object, and this would in turn create that very bright light hitting the object. Because of the simple fact that I didn't really touch the surface of the paper with my fingertips, you'll notice that there's very little smudging happening from my fingers, and any smudging that would have been done was controlled using the paper towel or the blending stick. And don't forget to sign your work. Given the fact that you're working on student pieces either for SBAs or for NCSE submission, you don't have to sign the front of the work, but make sure and put your name and also the date to the back. Thank you for tuning in to the introduction to still life drawing exercise. I hope that the activities were very beneficial to your own drawing process. Please stay tuned for the follow-up PowerPoint presentation, which will give you some easy to do exercises to assist with your drawing. Thank you and goodbye.